And I will announce the beginning of the call. Welcome, everybody. It's the third uh, pod support meeting of February. So it's February 28th, 2022, the last day of the month. And this is Jim Mansky with a, a fun looking gang of folks that I have familiar faces and new faces. I'm looking forward to exploring co-creating a life-serving feedback system with you all today. Yeah, so the plan is we'll start in just a moment with an opportunity to look at the matrix skill of openness to feedback and a chance to do some writing about it. So there'll be some journaling opportunities. If you're already registered as a candidate, you'll get a chance to do some journaling today about this idea of feedback. I like putting a little bit of time into these meetings for journaling because a lot of candidates say they don't have time to journal. So if you're already here, I think it's a way of really supporting you and getting your portfolio ready because that's what I want. It's for you to get your portfolio finished. Because we need more certified trainers and we need them now more than ever. But before we start, let's just start with 3 minutes of silence, just to acknowledge what might be going on in us with war breaking out in Europe and whatever feelings might be arising in us. So let's just take some time to just be with ourselves and mourn for 3 minutes, if you're willing. Thank you. Hey, Jen, welcome. I feel tender and eager at the same time to take advantage of the time that we have. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you and put up the skill called openness to feedback. The idea is that we'll just take about 5 minutes to be with this and do any writing that comes up for you about it. What comes up for you about where you are in your own pathway to becoming more open to feedback? About 30 more seconds. Okay. I made some small groups for checking in about whatever is alive in you about feedback. So I've got a pretty good mix of folks, I think. So we'll do this for 10 minutes. So everybody has about 3 minutes each with 1 minute at the end. Yeah, go ahead, Ju. Whoops, you're muted.
Yes, I just want to clarify about um, how to categorize ourselves into these 4 stages, because I guess it's not very coherent to say that always
Yeah,
something happens, like integrated person won't always
right.
be able to fully. So I myself consider that most of the times want A or B happen so that I can fit myself in one of those boxes. So how do you see it, please?
I think it's a great question, and I'm reluctant to answer until after the small groups because you might learn something. And I'd rather you
Okay,
learn from
okay.
each other than learn from me because I don't really want to be the guru. I really want you guys to, I want to create a mutual education system. But I'll be glad to give you feedback at the end. Does that work for you? Okay. Anybody unwilling to go to a small group and hang out with, meet some new friends and share your own experience of feedback for about 10 minutes? Great. Um, we will see you back here then in 11 minutes. Anybody got?
Maybe I'd like, oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Gonzalo.
Yeah, maybe I'd like to share something, which is I just realized when talking to the other people in my group that as a musician, as I started to create music that is much more aligned with what is really deeply true for me, it became much less important. Not important, I became much less impacted in a negative way by feedback. And yeah, the question came up for me, which was, yeah, and maybe that's the same in every area of my life, actually, with any expression. Um, if it's really aligned with what's important for me, it will feel similar, and maybe it does already. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So something about being aligned with your own values in however you're contributing seems to have an effect about your openness to receiving feedback.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Jew?
Yeah, what Gonzalo said reminded me a bit of our conversation, because one point was we discussed how receiving feedback from a place that involves an edge or a trauma or something that feels contradictory inside of us much more likely will drag us to the awakening vision that you showed us, or the unskilled completely. And that somehow Gonzalo saying that writing songs that were not aligned with what you truly believe, that truly resonated with you, I understood triggered you, or was more difficult to receive feedback from something that was not truly alive or resonate.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense to me that for me, feedback is often so painful when I get caught behaving in a way that's outside of the alignment with my own values. That's the most painful kind of feedback for me. Yeah. And Karimar?
Um, for me, I was every time I think about feedback, I realize that the most difficult part for me is giving feedback. That's just too hard for me to do, giving feedback. But if we're talking about receiving feedback, I would say it's more like personal feedback. And I'm wondering here about like personal, I mean, from like my partner, my mother, or my dad. That's very hard to receive feedback from them. And I'm wondering about when we are in a workshop, for example, and we're facilitating. Like so far, when I've been facilitating, what people, when they give me feedback, they would say specific stuff, like maybe you could go more slow, or specific stuff, and I receive it perfectly, and I hear to their needs, and that's good for me. But I'm wondering what would happen if they say like, "Oh, what you're saying is bullshit," or and I'm asking like, oh, how would I react to that? And I guess the skills I'm learning to when I'm in personal with my partner, for example, who I practice more than like who I get more daily practice with, I guess I would use kind of the same skills, trying to meet the needs behind, uh trying to hear the needs behind, sorry. Yeah, but I guess that's like, for me, that's the question, like when it gets more personal
Yeah.
and more like jackal, more jackal.
Yeah.
I'm still wondering how would I react in that situation.
Yeah. I share that curiosity, and I think you're pointing to something about feedback that relates to Drew's question before, which is that in my experience, how I respond to feedback is has a lot to do with context. Who's giving me the feedback about what subject? What state am I in? Am I ready for feedback, or am I overly tired or hungry or somehow out of resources, overwhelmed? It seems like where I am on that pathway um, is very dependent on the state of my resources and who's giving me feedback about what. And I really like the insight that that the same skill set can be applied, that we can map it over. So if something works in one context, like connecting to the feelings and needs behind the person giving the feedback, that has a protective effect for my own heart. Marshall's advice that I've been doing my best. It's been my 2-year practice now to live this one line that I heard him say in a recording. He said, and there's lots of variations of this, but um, someone was complaining about how difficult it was to get feedback from their girlfriend, and Marshall said, "Don't go there. Don't hear what they think. Just hear what they're feeling and needing." And it sounds so easy to say, and sometimes it is easy, but it really is the protective mechanism, I think. Thank you. So this first part has just been to kind of lubricate us to get ready to go into an even deeper dive about feedback. And so let me just share my screen with you again. So we're going to be talking about creating a feedback system. And so a feedback system could be quite simple, or it could be pretty complex. And so we're going to kind of narrow it down to 4 concepts to explore today. One would be the sender, one would be the receiver, one would be intention, and the other would be impact. So I think the words are pretty explanatory, self-explanatory, but just to be clear, right now I'm the sender. You know, whoever is practicing honesty in NVC terms, whoever is expressing, that's the sender of the feedback. The receiver is the person who's receiving the message. The intention is what's behind either the receiving of feedback or the giving of feedback. What needs am I connected to in relationship to the feedback? And then the final element is what's the effect of the feedback? I actually like the word effect better than impact because it has less of a violent feel to it to me. But it's often in these discussions the word impact is used, so I wanted to include that today. So let's go back to doing a little journal exploration. And imagine from the point of view of the sender, what's the purpose of feedback from the point of view of the sender? So again, I'll be quiet for 5 minutes while you contemplate it and maybe do some writing about what's the purpose of feedback from the point of view of the sender, either when you're sending or when you're empathizing with the other person who's sending you a message. What do you imagine the purpose is? About 30 more seconds for this question. So, what's your empathy for the sender? What comes up for you when you consider the sender of feedback? Why are they doing it?
Um, being very objective, I wrote in my journal it for celebrating the skills of the receiver, uh, attending the need for growth of the receiver, of support, of cooperation, or maybe mourning our unfulfillment with some experience.
Thank you. Yeah. Anybody come up with anything other than what's on Ju's list? Yeah, go ahead, Roger. And then Jen.
Well, my list is meeting needs of self-expression, letting others know about the status of my own needs, what needs are met or not met by what's they've said or done, connection, um, and contribution. My feedback would be a gift, and of course communication.
Thanks, Jen.
All right, Roger got a couple of mine, but I still have harmony, creativity, choice and options, and honoring agreements. So especially if we've agreed to give each other feedback. And
Yeah, thanks. Anybody got anything else that's not been listed yet?
I'll just add, this is Corey. I could see for myself, it goes into two categories. So that would be, my intention would be self-expression to contribute to the needs of another or a group of others. Like, so that could be any needs, under the sun, really. And the other one is self-expression for just basically my own needs. And that could really be just about any needs there too. It was kind of cool to see two different categories for me that I can see, but really all needs could be included pretty much.
Yeah. Anything else before we do the next question? Okay. You can probably guess the next question, right? From the point of view of the receiver, what's the purpose of feedback? Oops. Sorry. About 20 more seconds. Anybody would like to give feedback about this question from the point of view of the receiver? Yeah, Ju.
Before answering your question, Jim, I just want to express that I'm afraid I'm taking a lot of time from the others, especially now that I'm high on coffee. I become very participative. So let me know, please, okay? And I noticed while writing many things, I want to draw attention for two things I wrote. I noticed that when I ask for feedback, I am trying to meet my need of reassurance and acceptance, and I consider it very dangerous because I interpret it as a very unskilled motivation for asking feedback.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. I had never really thought about that, but it resonates for me. Sometimes that is why I ask for feedback, and it can be risky. Yeah. Karimar?
Yeah, when I ask for feedback in a workshop I'm facilitating, it's more like to hear what needs are not being met and to see if I can contribute to more needs being met in the group. And also, I realize that sometimes for people it's difficult to express their unmet needs. So it's a way also to open the space for people to actually feel comfortable expressing and express what needs are not being met. And if I am in front of a trainer and I am just like giving a presentation in front of a trainer, I want feedback from that trainer in order to see if like, hey, what can I do better? What, yeah, better, or what, like, it's more like I want to grow, I want to know more, I want to have more tools. So
Right.
can you help me?
Right.
So it's
Learning and
kind of
growth.
in that way.
Learning and growth in the service of contribution, so that you can be the best trainer that you can be and contribute to the most needs. Makes sense. Anybody else? Great. Well, I think it covers the ones I was expecting and got some new stuff too. I appreciate it.
Jim, I have a couple more. So
Great.
for me, I also looked at it as like, say it's a child or something like that talking to me, like what maybe the purpose of, like as a receiver, I might think is, yeah, it could be them educating me what they like and don't like, right? And like, so their self-expression, but also so that to lead into a request is something that I noticed. And another thing, just as a trainer in that community, I think it can build community, like especially the vulnerability and what was the other thing? And maybe safeguards or bumpers too, to get us closer to NVC consciousness. And if we're going way off, that, yeah.
That makes a lot of sense.
I trust everyone to give me feedback in that regard.
Yeah. Yes, that really resonates for me as well. It's not always easy to receive the feedback, but boy, oh boy, it has certainly stimulated a lot of learning and growth for me. Thank you, Jen. Anybody else? Okay, so let's look at 4 different scenarios. So the first scenario is, what's the best thing that can happen systemically? So now there is an alignment between intention and impact or effect. So let's say I'm the sender, I'm working with a candidate, and like we had this really fun candidates group yesterday of some people that are in their pre-assessment process. It was really clear that the feedback that I was offering had the intent to enrich their experience to contribute to so many of these needs that you guys have talked about. And it was seemed very clear in the checkout round and throughout the whole experience that the effect was people were learning a lot and growing a lot. And we really created this system that Marshall Rosenberg talked about of mutual education, like a mutual education system. I'm pretty sure I learned as much there as anybody else. And what I like about thinking about an alignment of intention and effect like this is that it equalizes power. So when I go in with the attitude that my intention is to both enrich the participants and to enrich myself, then I'm much more likely to come from power with than with power over. I'm going to be learning a lot. They're going to be learning a lot. And so this is the aspiration. This is how I would like all feedback systems to be, where there's this intent to enrich and the effect is learning. Of course, it doesn't always work out that way. This is the worst thing that could happen. From the point of view of the receiver, is I sense that the intent of the sender is to punish me, and the impact that it has on me is pain. And a classic example for me is I was young. I was maybe 20, 23, 24 years old. It was I had just taken a job as a salesperson in a small retail store. There were only 2 or 3 people on the staff, and on this particular day, it was just my boss and me. And my boss said to me, I'd only had this job, by the way, for maybe a couple of weeks, if that. And my boss said that he needed to go to the bank and do some other errands. And so he was leaving me in charge of the store for the first time. And so he left. And after he left, I realized that he didn't really give me anything to do. It was a slow season, that we didn't have any customers. And I was bored. And so I picked out a book out of my backpack that I'd brought to read at lunch. And I just started enjoying reading that book. Oh, about an hour later, he came back in. I was still reading the book. I was probably really absorbed in the book, and he got angry. And he told me that I should be ashamed of myself. He told me that I should have been paying attention to, there were plenty of things that I could have been doing. I could have been dusting. I could have been calling customers. I could have been restocking shelves. He just gave me a whole list of things that I could have done. And he did it, from my point of view, he did it with an intent to kind of straighten me out. It felt very parental, and I felt shame and guilt. And so these very painful experiences arose in me, and I didn't like it. But as I've learned through my experience with NVC, that there is no intent to punish. So I would change it now. I would say that instead, that it's not quite right to have an intent to punish, because there's no need to punish. Punishment's not a need, it's a strategy. And so I want to associate intention with needs. And so as I look back, I imagine that there was a deeper need underlying the strategy that he was choosing to use, which was kind of speaking in a voice louder than I enjoyed, telling me what I did wrong, talking about my character as a human being, and so forth. But I imagine that underneath it, he was trying to contribute to those same needs that you were just expressing about the sender's needs. He was doing some mourning, and he might have even been feeling some feelings in himself about how he wasn't clear about what I could have been doing. I don't know what was really going on with him, but I want to assume a positive intention rather than to assume an intent to punish. And that's one way that I can kind of begin to transform my experience of feedback, is to, rather than connect to what's wrong, either in my behavior or in the behavior of the sender, who needs what right now? What are the needs that are alive? And so that turns it into the best thing that could happen for me. It certainly didn't happen immediately in this case, but even though I still kind of saw I had an enemy image of my boss, at least for a little while there, because I thought he was trying to hurt me. But I began to wonder if there was something in his feedback that I could learn. And as I thought about it and reflected about it, I realized how I could have taken more responsibility in that particular situation. Before he left for the bank, for example, I could say, "Hey, boss, what would you like me to be doing while you're gone?" So I could have taken responsibility for asking. Um, I could have uh, also just made some empathic guesses had I had the skill at the time. I could look around and see, well, gosh, I'm sure there's some dusty things or some dirty things or some shelves that could be restocked, and so forth. So I really took it in, his feedback, as the opportunity to learn something and then modify my behavior from then on. And I actually made it like a little promise to myself that I would do better from now on, and that I would ask more questions and so forth. So I really tried to take that learning and end up living from what I had learned, to integrate that learning. And then one last thing here, from the point of view of the sender, what's the worst thing that could happen? So now I'm the person giving the feedback, and maybe I'm talking to a candidate that I'm working with, or maybe one of the AITs, the assessors in training, of which Roger and Majida and River are kind of all in that category here. And my intention is to enrich. I'm really clear that I want to make their life more wonderful by offering them feedback. And what I find out, though, is that that there was an impact of harm. So that for me is the worst, almost it's the second worst thing that can happen, is that, and it's actually why I chose to become an assessor in the first place, is because I didn't think I was very good at giving feedback, especially feedback that sounded like the word no, or you're not ready, or anything that would be talking about another person. And I didn't think I would be very good at it. And I'm still not quite sure that I'm very good at it, but I'm getting a little bit better because of my NVC skills, and by getting feedback from other assessors, and by getting feedback from candidates and so forth. So it's helping me to refine my intention to enrich, and also my skills of how to deliver the feedback. And also has helped me to realize some more skills that could be used when I find out that my impact or the effect of my feedback has been harmful for the person. So I just want to pause here and suggest that we now go back to small groups, new small groups, and talk about what's alive now, having had this little meander, a little exploration of some of the things that can happen in creating a feedback system. So unless there's an objection, I'd like to reopen the groups. And we'll do it this time for 20 minutes. So nice leisurely chance to explore this. And so it'll be a total of 21 minutes. All right, enjoy. I've been lonely. So I would like to hear from each of you what you're learning from each other. So I'd love to hear your feedback about what we've done so far. And I'll just go on the order of my screen. If you have nothing to say, you can just pass. I'll start with Karimar and then go to Roger. So what's alive in you now about feedback, Karimar?
I realized that I spoke more about my fears around giving feedback. Uh, and just I want to make a question to see if we can explore in a moment, like especially when, like, for example, when I'm right now, I'm assisting some MVC workshops. And when I am observing two new participants, for example, that are learning MVC, or maybe they have been learning MVC for a while, and we are in an empathy exchange, and someone starts to give suggestions or give advice, and they're like, "Oh, I know I want to say something, but giving feedback is very hard." So I realized that during our exchange, I spoke a lot about my fears on giving feedback.
Yeah, so you really got clear on your edge. You really got clear on your edge around giving feedback. And would you like to hear just a brief suggestion about how you might work with it? So what I do when I notice a strong edge like that is I look at the whole matrix and I look at what's my strengths. What are some of the strengths that I can count on? And then, so let's just say that in this case, the edge would be expressing honesty, right? And so I would look and say, and this is definitely my edge, by the way. I would look at what skills might help me that I feel more confident in. And so I would think about presence, and I would think about empathy for me. And so then I would ask, the second question is, how could I use my strengths to work on my edge? So how could I use presence and empathy to work on the skill of expressing honesty? And I would just hang out with that question, and you'll come up with your own practice that you can try out, and then you can tweak it and see. So how does it sound to you?
It resonates to me, and it gives me more ideas. Like immediately when you said it, thoughts like, oh, I could do this and that, and like strategies of what I could do came to mind.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Roger, and then Christina. Roger, you're on mute.
Tell me that before I begin speaking.
Good feedback. Thank you.
Yeah. So I really enjoyed this session. I just enjoyed more connection and just getting to know the people in my breakout. And I like that. And I got some clarity on some aspects of feedback that I don't think about very often. And just remembering a couple of tips from Marshall. It was part of a conversation where he was coaching us on making requests, and when sending a message to somebody else about needs not met, and there's pain or hurt, for us, that he said, even if that's crafted as a perfect, giraffe message, what happens is the Jackal postal delivery system grabs it in midair and turns it into criticism. And what we need to do is put a request at the end of that expression. That what I'm wanting from this person is just to be heard, or what comes up for you. I'm not thinking you did anything wrong, but what's it like to hear this? So just remembering some of those tips that we all know, and I forget that I know them. Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks, Roger. Christina, and then Gonzalo.
I'm a bit tired, so let's see if I can express myself. It was important for me to go deeper in thinking about the feedback, because I usually don't. And what I found very important for me was to remind myself that feedback is the perspective of the other person. For many years when I was younger, I used to think that feedback was the, like when someone else was saying something, I used to think it was the truth. So I was very afraid and disconnected and angry sometimes. And of course, now I'm much better. But anyway, it's something that I need to always remind myself, like this is just the other person's perspective. And thank you for this.
Yes. Yeah, I really enjoy that shift in perspective. The little mantra that I've been using lately to help me with that is feedback is always an expression of the preference of the sender. That's all it ever is. All it ever is an expression of the preference of the sender. And I may share their preference and I may not share their preference. But when I remember all it is their preference, even if they're kind of doing it in a demanding way or whatever, it's still just their wish. It's their hope. It's the world they want to live in. Then I can relax and either take it or leave it. Gonzalo and then River.
Yeah, so something that I experienced during our conversation was that when I was receiving feedback, I realized, yeah, there is a part of me that really wants to hear praise, and that's okay, and I can hold it with care and focus my attention on what the person is feeling. That, I mean, in this case, it was appreciation in this case. So when I was able to really connect with what the person was feeling and the comfortable feelings of satisfaction, it felt much more nutritious than when I put my attention on praise. Like it felt really nutritious and satisfying, meaningful. And it's interesting because it's when it's not about me that it feels more nutritious and satisfying. So that was interesting to notice.
It is interesting. Yeah, I like that. It's like empathy or attention on the feelings and the needs of the other person is like an antidote to the parts of feedback that can either be addictive, like praise. I certainly am addicted to that at sometimes in my life, or an antidote against the pain of receiving feedback we don't like. If I stick with empathy, I can't get to those other places as easily.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Thank you, River, and then Jen, if you're ready.
Yeah, I'm appreciating the growing aspect of this process. For me is leaning into an assessor in training, and there was a really poignant recount of someone receiving feedback that was so painful to hear in a public way and triggered previous experiences that compounded the suffering. And my interest in taking away is many times my intention for education or contributing to someone's growth can, unbeknownst to my intention, trigger a response that I didn't mean. And what I want to take from that is offering the impacted person my compassion in the form of recognizing that they may not be resourced at the moment to continue, but they may feel like they need to. So some circumstances in my mind, I just got to keep going forward. Somebody says something to me and I'm triggered and I'm constricted and I've lost my options. I'm just going through the motion, so to speak. If I had the capacity and the power to say, I've got a resource and come back, sometimes there's an apparent change in power that I don't feel like I might have that, or someone may not feel like they have that capacity. So I want to increase my sensitivity to at least offer the option. It seems like this might be a difficult time. I'm happy and willing to find another time when there's might be more equivalent resourcing. Something like that. I just want to be sensitive to notice when there might be a triggering going on, and there may not be a safety to do much or the resources to do much in that case. So that's more than I thought I was going to say, but I feel like that's enough.
I think it's really important that you said it. And for me, the little key phrase that you didn't say, that the way that I hold it is that it's empathy for the request. That we might get what the other person's request is before they get it. And so we can make it on their behalf. Would you like a little break before we keep going? Or would you like to skip this feedback session or whatever? So thanks, River. I see your hand, Ju. Can you hold it until we hear from Jen, and then I'll come to you next? Did that work?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
Jen and then Ju.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. So for me, yeah, I was in the same, that there are times when feedback will cause us to get off center. And that we're going to need to, River, I'm hoping River might expand for me quick, is noticing it and permission to feel it, especially if it's trauma-ish response or brought up all kinds of things, and then resource ourselves. And we didn't quite get to finish what resourcing ourselves meant. So that's really alive for me to hear a tiny bit more about that.
Thank you. Yeah, very important. Figure out how to resource ourselves, especially. I think you're bringing up a really valuable point for us to consider as trainers. Is when we're giving feedback, we might be unintentionally stepping into someone else's trauma story without really knowing it, and to be really careful about that. To seek permission when possible before offering, and to make sure that there's a willingness, and to even be cautious about, once we receive permission, to check it. Are you sure? It can also be helpful, especially in tender cases. Ju, and then Majida.
Yes, thank you, Jim. I had to cut off my camera because my internet is not very good.
Okay.
So I was in the river with, I was in the group with River and Jan, and we discussed about this very vulnerable situation that triggered me many traumas, and and it still does. And I was sharing how, regardlessly of me understanding the intention of the person who gave me the undesired feedback for safety, cooperation, and mourning maybe, I still can't shift the painful impact that generated that motivated me into an impact for possibility to connect with, powerful and painful to me. And I am in the process of mourning for many days, and I'm still mourning it. I've cried, I've expressed my rage, and we were just talking, River was giving a suggestion of 3 letters. Just when we got interrupted, and I would really like River to listen that until the end, if you feel like sharing with the group what that process was about.
Great. Thanks for the request, and I think there will be time for that, because it's actually the last step, is to figure out some resources that we can use. And I'll leave it at that for the moment and go to Majida, and then we'll finish with Corey.
I really have enjoyed this so far, and I trust I will continue to. So I am enjoying the learning. I enjoy the clarity of the PowerPoints and the different steps. My brain loves that. And I enjoy the reminder of how liberating it is to shift from the thoughts into the focus on feelings and needs. And I've enjoyed that Corey remembered we met in Madison maybe over 10 years ago, and also enjoying the embodied sense, shifting again from the thoughts into the physical sensations that arise when we focus on our heart and we can open our heart to what matters. So I'm grateful to the people in the small groups, and I'm grateful to you, Jim, for organizing these. And I'm happy I came on the call and curious to know what will happen next. That's me. Thank you.
Thanks, Majida. Corey, anything that you'd like to share?
Yeah, thank you. I will say ditto to pretty much everyone. Thank you so much. There's so much on this topic, right? It brings up so much. And so I'm just so every time people speak, I'm just like, yeah, yeah, yeah. So one of the things that I didn't talk about in my small group that's coming to mind is the challenge of co-facilitation, which I did for over 10 years with my MVC friend, and the challenge of that, because you want to do feedback because you're never going to be 100% in alignment, right? So, and how we would both get triggered because we have a history of, in both of our cases, of a very critical parent. And so it was challenging to even begin sometimes, but yet I benefited from, I really needed another person, like it was helpful, even when it hurt a little bit, when it to hear, and then I could go, yeah, I didn't see it that way. Okay, yeah, I could change this, So I guess, yeah, it's like I'm still wondering how to navigate with people that know, to navigate these conversations with the people that know they have a big trigger on this, on criticism, and how to help set that up. And based on what you just said, River, that I'm working on with myself is daily practice of resilience, what you might call resourcefulness exercises. And certainly before I go into a conversation like that, we could stop and do some deep breathing or whatever to become more resourced. So it's kind of where I'm going now, but I'm just really, I want to keep talking about this. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. So really enjoyed the feedback about where we are so far, and I'm so liking this is the 5th time or 6th time I've done this class this month. So I love the ongoing feedback I've received from people as we've explored it with other groups, not only just English speakers, but with Chinese speakers and Japanese speakers and so forth. And so it's really helped to polish it and create more space. So we finally get a chance to do the last step today, which we haven't had a chance to do in the other classes. So let me just share my screen one last time and invite you to look at back to the matrix again, especially the integrated aspiration. I consider that last column of the matrix skills aspirational, kind of the part of the vision that we all might share. So just hang out with that for about 30 seconds or so. And just imagine the world that you would like to live in regarding feedback. What would the feedback system that met the most needs at the least cost look like for you? And then what can you do about it? What can you do right now to start creating a culture of a life-serving feedback system in your life? This is like a new insight that I've been working with in the last month or so, is that having a vision is great. It's very motivating to have a vision, and then to take that next step, that request piece, and realize that I can, even though my vision might take 500 years to fulfill, I can do what I can do now to start creating a culture, a practice that begins to bring my vision to reality. So what can you do? I'll be quiet for a minute and then we'll do a final round, and we'll start with River in about 1 minute. So River, would you go first? What are you doing to create a culture?
Um, oh gosh. Well, one of the things is I want to respond a little bit to what Drew was mentioning, and this information I think is something that you shared, Jim. Um, I recommend listening to the 9 Skills for Navigating Conflict that's available on the NVC Academy that Jim and Jory offered. I think this came from there. It's a 3-step process to get back to our resourcefulness, to get back to zero. So it's NPR, noticing that I'm upset. When I notice that I'm triggered, I think I'm 80% back to choice and warmth and openness. After I notice and give myself the permission to feel whatever I'm feeling, to let it be whatever's going on in me, to allow that to happen. So noticing, giving myself permission, and then R is resourcing myself, finding some way to resource. Notice skills from the matrix that Jim demonstrated a little while ago, of like presence and empathy, and build on that to help myself come back, or to notice gratefulness, take a walk in nature, whatever resources you. So it's noticing, giving permission, and resourcing.
Thanks, River. And Karimar, would you go next? Any ideas you have about building a culture of a life-serving feedback culture?
Yeah, I guess what I've been learning is to ask for like learn to ask first, what is the kind of feedback I'm prepared right now for? Because maybe I'm not emotionally able to receive feedback related to needs not met. So learn to request what kind of feedback I want and practice that. And also think carefully about the intent when I want to offer feedback. Like, what's the intent? And also, if like I'm thinking about in a pod, for example, we are starting the pod and people is starting to ask for feedback, and I'm like, okay, what was the intent with what I want to say? And if it's about needs not being met, do I want to ask something? Do I want to request something? So thinking carefully about that before giving the feedback. Yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah, it makes sense to me. Gonzalo and then Christina.
Magic. Um, I'm not sure. At this moment, what is very clear for me is that if feedback, if I'm capable of really listening beyond me, in the sense that, yeah, I mean, it's been said, but I'm just really connecting with the freedom that comes from that. I think that's, and sharing and living from that freedom of going beyond moralistic judgments. It's really a sense of freedom that I think creates ripples in other people's experiences when they relate with me, and I'm not in that more judgmental mode, you know, and I think that's already something I can try to move towards.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Thank you. Christina, and then Jen.
Um, well, I just thought that maybe I can train myself to, like Karimar, to ask for the kind of feedback that I want to receive. And maybe that will help me to be more open to receive feedback.
Yeah.
And also finding ways of giving feedback to others that don't scare me and don't hurt others. I have some training in strategies to give feedback that don't hurt
Yeah.
other people. That makes them less hurt. If they are hurt, they are less hurt. Yeah, but I think I need not to be scared of giving feedback.
Yeah. Thanks, Christina. Jen, and then Majida.
Yeah, one thing that comes up for me, I'm still not sure how exactly, but part of it would be like, as much as I want to be able to ask for the kind of feedback I'd like to receive, also remembering that it can be really hard for people to give feedback, like especially for unmet needs, and yeah, stretching to meet them when possible, and just hear yes please and no thank you with our, like with the giraffe ears type of thing. But yeah, just to really I don't know, something about not completely detached, but somehow have, yeah, honor how hard it can be to give feedback. Thanks.
Thanks, Majida, and then Ju.
I think for me, so much of it comes down to remembering to pause and breathe before I respond or react, actually, to the feedback that is presented. That's one thing. And how might I remind myself to pause? I don't know. Just practice maybe touching my heart or something when it's difficult feedback. And yeah, that's enough for now. And also maybe introducing some of this within the people who share NVC here, if I have that opportunity.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ju, and then Corey.
So first, thank you, River and Jim, for your responsiveness to what I asked. Before I answer, Jim, quickly, in this meeting came to my mind a video that I watched, a TED Talk of a guy who struggled receiving feedback, and then he decided to become a football referee to practice receiving feedback and to bring joy to this conversation. If I can send it to you by email, you can the rest of us if it pleases you. What I'm going to do to change this, my now is try to use the NPR, and in the resources area, I'm going to use your suggestion to analyze how my strengths can aid my edges. And I do a weekly self-assessment through the matrix to liberation and a list of my strengths and edges. And that, I believe that's going to be very useful. Thank you.
Thank you. And Roger, would you like to unmute and go next?
Thank you for the reminder. So I think for me, it's my contribution to developing feedback systems going forward is just to breathe. I really resonated with what Majida said. Breathe and just check in with myself. And I may need to give myself empathy if I'm getting feedback, or yeah, and before I give feedback, just checking in with my intention. Yeah.
Thank you, Roger.
Thanks.
What a rich session this has been for me. I wanted to just share one last slide, and I
Jim,
just put.
could I
Oh, go ahead,
didn't
Corey.
get it.
Go ahead, Corey.
Yeah, I just wanted to say real quickly, I loved everyone's share, and I just wanted to add, I found it helpful to actually just state my intentions before any kind of feedback, because it's so easy to not hear that, and even to ask, like for example, when I wanted to have a conversation with my nephew who moved in with me when he was a teenager, and we had a lot of conflicts, and so I decided to just tell him flat out why I wanted to have the conversation in very simple English, no NVC. And then we had like the best connection based on that. It was just so simple. But yet sometimes there's something about NVC that we go right into it, but we assume people know our intention, maybe?
Yeah.
Because, we are so clear where we're coming from, right?
Right.
So I share that. It was off the charts amazing, better when I did it that way.
Yeah.
So I wanted to share that. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for tracking that. I had moved people around on the screen and almost forgot you. Thank you for speaking up. So let's see here. I put the slideshow into the chat if you would like to have it. And the slides that we didn't get to today it's intentional not to get to them because they're really for like thinking about it later and maybe talking with your pod or with friends or mentors about it. Some other elements to consider in creating a feedback system could be power, like Majida mentioned in the chat, status, which is different than power, kind of like working with issues around hierarchy and so forth, and our state of being. Those seem like other critical elements in creating a powerful feedback system. And then these 4 questions, I use these over and over again. Got them from Dominic Barter, who's a trainer down in Brazil, the founder of Restorative Circles. And the variations on these 4 questions: what are you celebrating about feedback? What gets in the way of receiving feedback that you enjoy? What's your vision of a life-serving feedback system? And what can you do to help co-create a quality feedback system for yourself? This is great journaling. And you could use these 4 questions for any of the matrix skills or any of the key distinctions as well. It's a great format that I really enjoy it when my candidates use these 4 questions. And they kind of go right along with NVC because you're going to make some observations with the first question, you're going to kind of in touch with your feelings with the second one, get in touch with your needs with the third one, and your requests with the 4th question. So with that, I think we're done today. I'm really grateful for your presence and that all the 10,000 things that you do that I have no idea that you do in the service of our mission to help bring more peace and nonviolence in the world. Next month, the plan is to focus on self-assessment. So right along with Ju's aspiration, we'll talk about how we can include self-assessment in a life-serving feedback system, and also the perils of that. There's both benefits and possible not so much benefits. One last thing, I'm gonna share. I saw a request to share it again, the slideshow, so I'll put it back in. And also, pathwaysliberation.com is available. There's another version of this that I did for beginners in our practice group, which is on Mondays. And so you can also see how the same kind of a training can be adapted for different audiences with different needs. So with that, we're done. Thank you all for being with me. I look forward to seeing you next month. If you have any feedback, please write to me. Aloha. Bye-bye.
Just a quick question, Jim, sorry.
Sure.
Is about journaling. I've been journaling like personal situations, encounters, and also about key differentiations, but you're mentioning about journaling about this. So what part of the portfolio, how does it come?
It's an optional thing. And I actually got the idea from Maya Diaz, who was the first certified trainer from Venezuela. And I did some mentoring with her when she was in her pre-assessment. And I suggested that she do one journal entry for one skill, the skill of presence, because she had talked about that as an edge that she was working on. And she ended up doing a journal for every single matrix skill using those 4 questions. And I was just blown away by how powerful. I said, you need to go get this published as a book. It was just so deeply reflective and clarifying to read. So that's why I now suggest it to candidates.
Okay.
All
Thank
right.
you very much.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.